Hello and welcome to this OECD webinar with me, Duncan Crawford. Thank you so much for joining us today. In many parts of the world, students are heading back to school around this time of year, so it's a timely moment to discuss the unique challenges that students and teachers face at this time. There's lots to discuss. We're going to explore strategies for managing stress and anxiety, ways to effectively engage students in changing learning environments. What is the right mix of hybrid, online and in-person learning? And we'll also discuss, of course, as we almost always do, the impact of AI, how to integrate technology into the classroom, particularly when students are heading back to school. So there's lots to get into, and our goal today is to give you some practical insights to help make this school year a success. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists, I'm glad to say, who are going to guide us through this conversation. On the panel today, Mike Thiruman, General Secretary of the Singapore Teachers Union. Thanks for joining us, Mike. Nadia Christy Lee, a senior high school student in Jakarta and a student representative for the OECD's Future of Education and Skills 2030 project. And last but not least, OECD Senior Policy Analyst Anthony Mann, who's carried out a lot of work on supporting students in their career development. Thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. Let's get the discussion started straight away. Not everywhere, but in many places, like I say, the school term has recently begun, or it's about to get started. So I think it's probably appropriate to start with a student on our panel to get her perspective. Nadia, you're 15, a student in Indonesia in Jakarta, and I understand you began your term in the last month or so as a senior in high school. For you personally, and for those you know, your friends, is it an anxious time when you're going back to school? Is it something you most look forward to or not?
Okay, hello to everyone. I am Nadia Christy Lee. I'm currently 15 years old, and I have just started school a month ago. So before I started school, definitely I didn't know what was going to happen because this is a major part in my life, transitioning from junior high school to senior high school. And when I was in elementary going to junior high school, I remember that I was really excited. But now maybe I know that senior high school is a more serious stage with a lot of academics and focus towards universities. I am not like crazy hyped for it, but I'm definitely looking forward towards senior high school. It's been around a month and I think it's been going well. Like I've been enjoying my lessons at school. I do notice that there is a lot more work, so I'm hoping that in the future I'll be able to accomplish all of that in, the time given.
Thanks for that, Nadia. A quick follow-up for you. Is there anything you'd have liked your schools or teachers to have done in the build-up to returning to school that you think would have made that transition to a senior easier?
Okay, so actually, my school has provided a bridging program. So during the summer holidays, we would gather the new students for us to have a little bit introduction towards the material. However, I do notice that all the new students have like a separate class, separated with the old students. So I do think that if we were given an earlier chance to make friends with the old students, I think we could definitely make the transition much more smoother. Because when we go into like a new environment, there are a lot of people we do not know. And having a couple more sessions before the first day of school would really help to get to know one another more.
Thank you so much for that. Very interesting. Mike Thiruman, General Secretary of the Singapore Teachers Union. Let me bring you in on that. Is there similar sort of bridging activities which take place in Singapore to ease the transitions when people are starting a new term?
Okay, for teachers, there's a lot of work to be done prior to the school starting. And as you know, we are already towards the end of the school term for us in Singapore. We start in January, so we're sort of rounding up. But usually what happens is teachers have a discussion with their school leaders and key management officials on how and what duties they're going to embark on and the classes they would be taking. So that preparation happens prior to coming back into school. So that sort of helps. For students, because in Singapore's context, the breaks are not that long, right? So the transition is far smoother for students to make.
What, from a teacher's perspective, from teachers you speak to, what are the main challenges for teachers when a new term is starting? Is it stressful, that period, or is it the calm before the storm?
I think they are both excited and anxious. Meeting new students, they're meeting their expectations, right? Because at the end of the day, teaching and learning is about human interactions. It's not content competencies per se, because our teachers are very competent professionals, but it's the interaction, the dynamics that happens in the classroom. And whenever you bring together a group of different individuals, the dynamics kind of changes every time, every year. Even if you're an experienced teacher, you need to be part of the group to feel what's happening, to guide your own teaching and learning processes. Because at the end of the day, you need to win over the students before you can start teaching content proper, right? So the building of the human relationships is fundamental. And that differs from year to year, class to class, teacher to teacher, and students to students.
Thanks for that. Let's bring in Anthony Mann from the OECD. In terms of building those relationships with new students, Anthony, is there anything in particular which teachers should be doing or students should be doing at this time of year, which is recommended to ensure that people aren't feeling anxious when they're starting a new term?
Yeah, well, I have both a personal interest in this and a professional one. And my personal one is that I have 3 teenage children who are all going to go back to school over the next week. And I asked them today, on a scale of 1 to 10, how enthusiastic they felt going back to school. I got an average of 4 out of 10, which was probably a bit higher than I thought, actually. And it kind of speaks, I suppose, to kind of my professional interest in this, because I lead work at the OECD, which is all around career development and how schools can help prepare young people for their futures in work. And it speaks really to kind of the motivation of being in education and their understanding of young people about why they're there. You know, what's the point of it? Now, you know, of course, education is not just about sort of like getting a job at the end, but all of us and all of us adults know, and Nadia, you will find out that sort of like jobs can either be really fulfilling and really enrich your life, or they can be pretty terrible. You know, and we kind of want our education systems to help young people to end up in fulfilling sort of like roles in society. So at this time of the year, really, I suppose my focus is, in my thinking, is really about the motivation, about how young people can be helped to, you know, see the benefits of engaging education, to take fullest advantage of their time in education. And we kind of know from our PISA data from the OECD Programme for International Student Assessment that an awful lot of students at your age, Nadia, don't really engage in career development, don't have a clear idea about what they want to do, don't really have a very informed idea about what their plans for the future are showing actually quite a lot of anxiety about the future, finding it difficult to make decisions. And often this is a kind of a key stage in your secondary education. And we kind of know that, you know, where young people do have a clear sense of the future, you know, it aligns with a greater sense of well-being. You know, they're more confident and happy in their engagement in education. So at this time of year, I think one of the things which is kind of easy to forget really is, you know, what are some of the big overarching points of being here? And that's where, you know, a rich diet of good career development can make such a big difference.
Thanks for those insights, Anthony. And Nadia, if I can come back to you, some of the things which Anthony mentioned there, the anxiety and stress for some at this time, is that something which you see amongst your friends or others at school where it is an issue and people are concerned about returning to the classroom?
I feel like as teenagers, it is very normal for us to have a little bit of anxiety before we start school, because it's something that we don't know what the next year is going to be like. And as teenagers, we are more aware of our actions and aware of, you know, what people say and all the comments, like especially in social media and all that. So when coming into school, like when we just started school, of course, we have a lot of thoughts going in our minds. But I think that most of us were able to handle it quite well. We're able to organize that thoughts and go into the academics and the school life really quickly. So I think it's normal for, some of us to feel anxiety, but I don't think it's a too big of a concern here. I think it's a very common thing for us to experience.
Thank you for that. Let me bring Mike back
Maybe
in
if I
here.
can just jump in, sorry,
Go on,
Duncan.
Mike, jump in, please.
I think in terms of students, at least in Singapore's context, almost all students are involved in extracurricular or co-curricular activities. So this does not really stop when the school term ends. It continues, and there are like programs ongoing. So the interactions among students continually happens even during school holidays. Right. So teachers may be in school helping with the kids, but kids themselves are ongoing, doing their co-curricular activities, and this builds bonds. At the end of the day, this is core to creating a sense of belonging, if you want, right? So if you don't have anything at all on why you want to be in school, at least this sense of belonging, being with friends, being in the company of people you understand and relate to really helps. Right. So I think building relationships is important. And then to Anthony's point about why are they there? I think at the end of the day, students themselves must find some purpose on what they want to learn, why they want to learn, creating their own sense, making sense of what they are learning. I think that's critical. Right. So both relationship and sense making would be really helpful in keeping students in the classroom, in the schools, as well as for teachers, right? It's why we became teachers, not to teach our subjects per se, but to teach students, to nurture young people.
Thank you so much for that, Mike. I can see some people are making comments already in the chat. Please do get involved. If you've joined by Zoom, you can just click on the chat function at the bottom of your screens, write in a comment or a question, and I will try to get through as many of those as I can. Let's move the conversation on for now, though, and focus a little bit on academic challenges at this time of year. In particular, is there anything schools should focus on at the start of the school year to help tackle potential learning gaps which have emerged perhaps from the year before? Mike, can I throw to you on this one to begin with? Is there anything schools do, particularly in Singapore, to tackle this issue?
In Singapore's context, there'll be probably very minimal learning gaps because the transition is far, more or less smooth because students are in the same schools and they move forward. But at the beginning of every year, I think teachers do a sort of an assessment to see how to bridge the gaps, if there are any. Right. So teachers will do it to ensure that their students up to mark, can catch up. Okay? Or because if the whole class of students are falling back, then you just start from wherever you left off of sorts. Right. Because there's no rush per se. At the end of the day, it's not about covering content. It's about ensuring learning takes place. And if you have to take a step back, you just take a step back and then move forward.
Understood. Anthony Mann, if I could bring you in on this point, is there anything which high-performing education systems do to ensure when there's a new term starting that if certain students have struggled the year before, that they don't fall further behind?
Absolutely, Duncan. But just before I answer that, I just wanted to pick up on something that Mike said a couple of minutes ago, which was about the importance of personal connections and making sense. And I think there's something really interesting in the data which we've looked at, which speaks to that, which is worth spending a moment. Because when we think about kind of the career development of students, it's often really hard to work out what really makes a difference when they're teenagers, because you're looking for impact sometimes 5, sometimes 10 years later, when they're actually out of the education system. How were other things which their schools did which allowed them to do better than they would expect if their schools hadn't done that? And when we look at kind of like cohort studies, longitudinal studies, big groups of young people who get followed from often about 14, 15, often to about 25. So thousands of young people in these studies get asked lots and lots of questions. And then you can see what the relationships are later on with better employment outcomes, being more likely to be in work. And if you are in work, earning more than you'd expect of somebody who didn't have good career development, happier in what you were doing. What we find is that we kind of relate these to how young people explore, experience, and think about their futures in work. But one of the key areas of exploration, it seems really simple, is that questions are asked of young people at 15. Have you had a conversation with somebody about a job you're interested in the future? And it could be a teacher, it could be a guidance counselor, or it could be a friend or a family member. And the very act of them having this conversation is associated with better outcomes 10 years later. Now, kind of like within that, they may not necessarily get that nugget of information, which makes the big difference to them. But what it shows is that they're actively thinking about their futures, and they're being encouraged and enabled by their community to do so. And then we have to relate that to what happens in education. So these really simple things are a really good indicator for us, whether somebody's kind of likely to be on the right track or not. Now, so just going back to, Duncan, what you're asking about in terms of kind of preparation for the next year. I mean, I think one thing which is particularly important, and Nadia, you're in this situation because you've gone from one type of schooling to another new type of schooling, which is how do we make sure that we have sort of like that continuity and that understanding of what young people are doing, what they're, where they've got to. And obviously there is a curriculum and people will know what the curriculum is, and there will be the assessments which Mike talked about. But in some areas, particularly around so like broader social development, that's more difficult. Our systems don't always pick that up. And what we find in a growing number of countries, Canada is a good example. Students are developing these online portfolios where they're making notes of their extracurricular engagements, their own developing career thinking, the activities which they take part in. So as they go through the system, we can pick these things up and we don't always have to start again from scratch.
Thank you so much for those thoughts there, Anthony. And Nadia, I'm going to put you on the spot to pick up on some of the things which Anthony mentioned regarding career discussions and thinking ahead to the future. I mean, have you had those sorts of conversations? Are they planned to take place? How do you view the situation in your school?
So definitely we have been asked really often, like, what do you want to be in the future? And a lot of us, ever since we were really young, our answers keep changing year to year. Like some of us wanted to be a teacher, but then we want to be a chef, and then we want to be something else. Personally, for me, I haven't decided on a specific major or a job that I do want to pursue, but I have an interest in science and research and all of that. So I feel like a lot of us students, we don't really know the exact major that we want to take, but we do have an idea of what our interests are. And I think how school really helps us is that it provides us a broad selection of many different kinds of like subtopics in a certain subject, and it allows us to go deeper into it, especially in senior high school, where when I was in junior high school, we didn't have like chemistry, biology, and physics separated so differently. Meanwhile, now we do have each of them separated with like an obvious line. So you can tell the difference between every single subject, and then we can know which one do we actually prefer. But I think it's perfectly all right for us to still be exploring in our current age, because you never know. Like maybe when you are about to apply for university, your interest may change. And because of that, I think nowadays a lot of students are focusing more on to be a well-rounded person. So they're not just focused on a really specific type of subject. Like me, even though I am focused in science, I also enjoy other things. Like I also enjoy writing, and I also have other hobbies like playing volley and all that. So I think we're just mostly enjoying school for now and trying to find out what we want to enjoy in the future.
Well, bravo to that, and take your time. No rush. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot for you to decide right here and right now. Anthony Mann, I see you've got your hand raised. Would you like to come back in?
Oh, I just thought it might be interesting to share some of the data we have from PISA here, because in PISA, which both Singapore and Indonesia took part in, we asked students, what type of job do you expect to have when you're about 30? And I can tell you that there's a couple of some interesting things about them. One is that the career expectations of students are really quite narrow. In Indonesia, 63% of girls say they're going to work in one of just 10 jobs. 22% of them say they're going to be a doctor. In Singapore, it's about half of girls say they're going to work in one of 10 jobs. Again, doctor's the top answer. I can tell you that in Singapore, for boys, it's about the same proportion. But the fifth most common expectation amongst boys to work is to be a professional sports person. And we see that amongst boys in a lot of countries. In Argentina, I can tell you it's number one, which may have something to do with the World Cup win, who's to say. But being able to articulate an expectation, even though it doesn't have to stay the same, for any period of time, it could change the next day. But just being able to articulate it is associated with better outcomes later on. Because Nadia, you're talking really interestingly about keeping your options open. But what you're doing here is you're kind of actively exploring. You're being asked about this all the time. You're thinking about it in terms of what you're interested in, what you like. You're engaged in a process, and that sort of uncertainty is associated still with good outcomes. But many students, particularly lower performers, they're showing lots of signs of confusion. I suppose you might call it aimlessness. As they go through the system, and they're going to fall out of the system quite early. And we kind of know that the more that they engage in their guidance activities, the lower levels of uncertainty, the clearer understanding they have. And they begin that sort of like that kind of that conversation with your future self about where you are now and who you can imagine you might want to be.
Thanks, Anthony. I see, Mike, your hand's raised. Over to you.
Just a couple of points. I think in Singapore, we're trying to get this thing thinking about from our students' perspectives as well. But we want our students to be successful, but we know there are multiple pathways of success, right? So this is something that our students must be thinking about, our teachers must be thinking about, and giving the opportunity for students to explore and eventually find a passion and pursue that passion, right? Doggedly, and to have that kind of resilience and perseverance to say that I want to move this agenda forward, right? The second point I wanted to also highlight is because career choices in the future are going to be very different, right? So we should not be blinkered as the career stereotypes that we have now and offer it to our students, but instead of skill sets and knowledge areas that they want to pursue, right? So more about areas and their passion rather than specific career options per se, because it will evolve. And even in terms of the subjects we teach in schools may actually have to move along as well. There's no such thing as just biology or chemistry now, right? It's always interdisciplinary, and those kind of concepts we must start thinking about them and pursuing them at the school level, interdisciplinary options, project work, those more real life options where students can pursue real world problems in the classrooms. That would give them some choices as well as they look into the world outside.
Thanks so much for those insights, Mike. And there's lots of comments coming in. I'll read a few of them out. James Michael Walker writes, this is according to Pew Research Centre, he says from 2020, that almost 2/3 of parents express concern about their children falling behind when school is closed. Kaniko Mishimi from Japan states that some children refuse to go to school after a long break. Do please keep sending in your comments. I will try to get through them. If I can jump back to Anthony Mann on this point, sort of, are there steps that schools and teachers should be considering to take right at the start of school terms for students who've previously struggled?
I mean, it's something which, I mean, and Mike will be well placed here to provide sort of professional insight here. I think what I would say is that in all of this, what we see in our PISA data is young people becoming increasingly focused on a small number of areas, and they've got we can look at the data going back to 2000 all the way to 2022. So every 3 years we have this data on what young people say. Brilliant samples we've got from many different countries. And what we see is that, as I was saying, we have this growing concentration of expectations amongst young people. But also we can look more broadly, like you're talking about, Mike. Increasingly young people are very focused on, I will go to university. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm going to do. And, some countries, 80 or 90% of students say that. They're very interested, increasingly, and a majority of them in most countries now, in becoming a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, you know, the professions, the classic professions. And so we see this narrowing. And I think, you know, picking up on your point, Mike, it speaks to, you know, the need to sort of bring the curriculum to life, to make learning relevant to as wide a range of people as possible. And so as they're coming into the system, there is, I think, you know, something of an obligation on schools to ensure that, you know, those students who are finding their different pathways, but interested in different pathways, you know, find that those pathways are being respected and supported. Because I think it's in many education systems, you know, increasingly sort of narrow focus, that success, you know, for social reasons, perhaps family pressure, is seen that, you know, you will go to a university, and perhaps you'll go to a particular type of university, you know, and everything else apart from that may not seem to be so highly validated or valued, you know, within that. And I think, you know, picking up what you're saying there, Mike, just to finish off here, you know, talking about, you know, work-related learning, real-world examples, actually connecting students with people from the world of work, incredibly valuable. Because when young people see people in the world of work, they get an authentic experience which they can trust, and they can learn, you know, more about what it's really like, you know, to perhaps be working a skilled trade where you might have more independence, might be working for yourself from a young age. You might be far more, you know, be able to use your practical skills. They can see for themselves what the actual working life is like. And they also might see that, you know, not everybody likes being a lawyer. And I certainly have got lots of friends who studied law for a long time and worked as a lawyer for 10 years before absolutely quitting because they hated it. But, you know, to encourage students to really genuinely believe that all these pathways, you know, are of value. And, you know, and I think that's somewhere where, you know, I couldn't talk about experience in Singapore or Indonesia, but more generally, I think we find that in some systems, you know, that, you know, we find you know, a kind of a relatively narrow perception of what success means.
Thank you for that there, Anthony. Mike, I see you nodding. Would you like to come in here or we move on?
Yeah, just a couple of things on your question about what can we do for students, right? When they are entering the schools in the beginning of the school year. I think it's critical that we ensure that the school is a safe and welcoming environment, right? I think from the teacher's perspective, we spend at least first 2-3 weeks just on classroom relationship building and making sure everyone feels safe and wants to come back, right? If you do not even want to be in the classroom, then forget about learning taking place, right? That's not going to happen. And especially if you have gaps in learning, whatever you're going to learn in the next grade, that's going to be an enormous hurdle for you to jump, right? So it's something that we need to consider in terms of how we create learning experiences in schools as we move forward in the new academic year. Second point is about teachers and the world of work and whatever not. So in Singapore, we have this teacher work attachment program where teachers can go during curriculum time or during school holidays, depending on where they can find this attachment, 3 to 4 weeks in a year. During a 10-year period or 5-year period cycle, that they can go and be attached to an organization outside school so that teachers themselves know what's happening in the world outside, right? This is fundamental, I think, because most of us as teachers, we've been from classroom to classroom, to school to school to school and back to school, right? The world outside has changed quite a bit. Our classrooms more or less remain the same. Blackboards became whiteboards, smart boards, but we essentially use them as the blackboard. So I think as professionals, teachers, we need to reframe our thinking on what we are doing, what our purpose is in terms of preparing the young people for their future. It's preparing them for their future. It's not just the world of work, but their future, which is going to be a lot more different than ours. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Mike. And forgive me if I misheard you. Was I right in saying there, am I right in saying there that you were saying that the first few weeks of term in Singapore is focused on well-being, making sure everyone's content in the classroom? And so does that mean that there's actually not many traditional lessons taking place in that period? There's that much focus on making sure everyone's happy in the classroom, the students?
Not happy per se, but comfortable. Right?
Yeah.
You want to have right? Because there should always be some sort of dissonance for people to move forward. But at least you feel welcome and safe. I think that is critical, right? And every teacher knows he or she cannot move forward in content learning or teaching if the child is not ready.
It's interesting, just because obviously Singapore is a very high performing education system according to international tests. It recently topped PISA results in maths, reading, and science. And I'm just wondering if other education systems have such a greater focus on ensuring that all students feel comfortable, as you put it, before the actual sort of nitty-gritty of learning and lessons gets underway. Nadia, what's it like in Indonesia where you are?
So at my school and in Indonesia in general, I think we really do prioritize how the students should already understand the current topic they're working on before moving on to the next topic. So the pace of the classroom changes once in a while. Like sometimes if the teacher goes on really rapidly on the topic and some of us do not fully understand, we slow down the pace a little bit to make sure all of us get it. However, it's not like 100% guarantee that everyone will fully understand the material. So as students, we do make use of other resources. Like sometimes when I'm confused on a certain subject, like chemistry or something, I Google up on YouTube, like chemistry tutorials or something. And AI really helps. I feel like in terms of inspiration, in terms of like writing essays and all that, it definitely helps a lot. But we do have to make sure to not misuse it. And other than the importance of making sure that we understand the things that we're learning throughout the process, we also have to make sure that in the middle of learning it, we do not suddenly get left behind. And I think this is another interesting point to be brought up because Mike previously mentioned how the outside world is very different and it's very important. I think this is where school life balance comes in because as a senior high school student, we do get a lot of homework. And every time after school, we would be spending most of our time doing homework that sometimes we don't have time to do other things, like our hobbies or the things that we can explore other skills outside of academics. And I feel like schools should really focus on this aspect as well, perhaps providing a little bit of time after school to complete our tasks so that when we get home, we can focus more on other interests and also spend more time with our family. But essentially, I think that school life balance is really important and just, making sure we're not overwhelmed with all the things that we're learning.
Nadia, some excellent points there. And I don't know how many students are watching this webinar, but if they are, I'm sure they're cheering you on with that message, have less homework, or at least less homework at home. You also brought up AI, which I think we've already had questions in the chat. So I might move on to that topic because kids are usually light years ahead of adults when it comes to taking up and using new technologies. And are students where you are aware of the focus and publicity about the potential impacts of AI on education? Are they bothered about it? Or have they been using AI apps for years already at school and it's the teachers who are playing catch up? Nadia, over to you.
Okay, so about the use of AI at school, we do use it very often. Teachers also use it very often. And in fact, they sometimes encourage us to use AI as inspiration in our works. But I do feel like in the upcoming year, AI will evolve a lot. I feel like more technologies such as, automatic note taking, because nowadays we do not take notes on paper. Sometimes most of us bring our laptops or tablets to take note in class. And I think eventually AI will replace that by having the same mechanism as like a voice to text, like that kind of mechanism, but in class and live. So I do think that both students and teachers need AI in their classroom, but sometimes there's this thing called AI dependency, in which when we use too much AI and then we start doing the exams on paper, we start feeling like we need something to help us because we're so used to it. And that's why I do appreciate the current use of paper and pencil. Like even though it's not 100%, it does help us to once in a while check up on ourselves to not be too dependent on AI. But yeah, definitely AI will evolve and AI will be a big use in the education world.
Thanks for that, Nadia. I saw Anthony Mann from the OECD nodding along there at many of the things you were saying. Anthony, if you'd like to come in on this, I mean, when students and teachers are coming back to the school for the first time, many of them around the world at this time of year, are there different challenges now because of AI?
I mean, I'm sure there are. I mean, I see it myself with my own children, who, with various degrees of enthusiasm, are making use of AI in their work. It certainly raises concerns for me. So personally, so this is, because this isn't really sort of like my policy area. In terms of a bit like you were saying, Nadia, about perhaps what's being lost. It speaks to in terms of, I suppose, the harder graft of being able to do it without having the digital device, sort of there to help you. But it kind of speaks to a kind of a broader question, really, about knowledge and about how accessible knowledge is becoming. And we've kind of seen that over sort of many years since the digital revolution of the 1990s, when people talk about, we're in the fourth phase of the fourth industrial revolution and so on, which is accelerating. And when we think about, traditional schooling, an awful lot of it really was about, knowledge, memorizing things and being able to repeat that in examinations under stressful situations to show that, it has already gone in and that, and that's what you're being judged on. But as knowledge becomes more portable, and we see this in the labor market, the things which employers often really value as in addition come more to the fore. So it's those broader competencies which allow people to be sort of personally effective as they undertake a task. Because some of the processes and tasks which used to be very knowledge heavily dependent have become automated. Others will become that knowledge become far more accessible. Kind of because of the terminology, because of the technology, which leads us to think really about kind of what is the kind of the appropriate preparation kind of for the 21st century. And it's a broad question, and it's too broad a question to discuss it, for us to resolve in that week before everybody goes back to school. But it's something I think is going to be on everybody's mind, because we know that the people of the future are probably going to do well, are the ones who can really harness AI effectively to support them, so like in their work. Generally, the OECD's work, when it looks at the way that this sort of technological change is impacting upon jobs, shows that there are jobs which will disappear, and there are jobs which will disappear as well because of sustainability and the climate change. But more often, jobs are going to change in sometimes radical ways, sometimes subtle ways. We still expect there to be lawyers, but the job of a lawyer is likely to change. That has a couple of implications. One is, this ongoing importance of being able to connect people, particularly your age, Nadia, with people in the labour market who are actually living this and can give you an authentic, experience about, well, what's it like? What do you expect to happen? We never really know for sure how things are going to change. Some of you may have been to London in the audience. There is on the underground, on the subway in London, all those trains could be driverless. You don't need a driver to be there, but they're not going to be driverless because the strikes which would be involved, the industrial action from the workers would be so disruptive that it's impossible. It would cost too much to be able to automate the whole system. And so, the technology can do things, but sometimes for social reasons, it doesn't do it. And I think that's going to apply in different economic areas, different occupational areas. And so it becomes important to be able to understand those and make sense of those and thinking about some, I suppose, the broader competencies which are valued. And here, the sort of extracurricular activities which people do, the drama, the sport, the debate, the engagement in student societies, the volunteering, the part-time working, the internships. All that gives young people an opportunity to be, kind of personally effective in an unfamiliar situation. And it can allows them to show that they can work with people, adapt to be able to work effectively with people, sometimes maybe difficult people, to get things done. And if we can do that in the safe space of an education, we're giving people an advantage. So when they actually do go into this labour market, they've got some experiences to draw upon, and so this is like going beyond the knowledge. We think about how we apply that knowledge, how we activate our knowledge, when we go into adult life.
Thank you for that, Anthony. Lots of very interesting points there. And I could see Mike Thiruman all the way over in Singapore, nodding along at times. So I imagine he's agreeing. Mike, what is the situation in Singapore in regards to AI? What are teachers telling you? Are they getting training on how to use AI in their lessons?
We definitely use AI in the lessons. I mean, AI is here to stay, and we're going to embrace it cautiously and carefully, but nonetheless embrace it, right? But the challenge that we pose to our students is, if AI can do this, then what can you do that AI cannot do? So that's the fundamental question every time, because even my boys, right, say, I can use AI to generate this. So the question then becomes, if AI can generate this, then what are you going to do? What can you do better? Or can you do more? Or what can you do differently than what AI can do? So those are the skill sets, knowledge integration, analysis, synthesis that we are focusing on, right? Like Anthony said, knowledge is pervasive now. It's no longer purely teaching content, but how to look at content. How do we analyze it? How do we create new content? How do we bring ideas together, right? So these are things that AI is still catching up on, although I think it has moved quite a bit in the last 1 year or so, but it's still catching up, and something that our students need to think about, right? And bringing people together. I think that's where AI or technology still is not there yet, right? The people skills. At the end of the day, we still need to sell the idea. Right? So these are the skill sets we are trying to develop in our students in Singapore. So I think the pandemic sort of helped in bringing technology back into the education space, really into the education space. I mean, we talked about technology integration 5-10 years ago, nothing much was really happening, right? But with the pandemic, we have gone full swing. We are not going to claw back, but the pandemic also showed us the gaps in technology. And the real gaps in technology and technology-based learning is building the relationships, building the skill sets that are not quite there yet for the students, right? Having that open discussion, leveraging on each other's idea. Okay, so that these are things that we are focusing on. And Anthony also mentioned about extracurricular activities. In Singapore, we stopped calling them extracurricular activities long time ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. We started calling them co-curricular activities, because we realized that the fundamental skills and dispositions can only be developed outside the classroom through these co-curricular activities. And these are a lot more fundamental moving forward. Character traits or dispositions like grit, perseverance, innovativeness, curiosity, all these things happens outside of classroom more often than inside the classroom, right? So I think we have gone full swing. So in Singapore's case, co-curricular activity is huge. My youngest son is a kayaker, right? What he learns kayaking 4 hours a day beats anything else he can actually learn in the classroom per se, in terms of character building, right? So I think those are the areas that we want to focus on, and it's a lot more difficult than teaching content.
Thanks for those insights, Mike. And Anthony, I see your hands raised, please.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, I'm just going to finish off this little section talking about AI, but just to kind of like flag a concern which we see in the data which we have, which is about a kind of a digital divide in terms of the skills needed to be able to make effective use of these technologies. And, we kind of know that that kind of applies to things like making judgments about the quality of the information which you're getting and being able to critically evaluate that, which speaks very much to what Mike was saying in terms of, we have it, but what, can we make effective use of it? And, we see that divide there, but we also, see, there are many teachers who have anxiety and concerns about whether they have sufficient training, understanding to be able to make full use of kind of the new technologies. It is a sort of like a concern, and I think that's something which increasingly, when we look at students and student progression, whether they have that basic digital literacy is going to be more and more important, one of the fundamentals. So we look at their, their language skills, the mathematics skills, but also do they have the digital literacy to really take full advantage of changes in teaching styles. And let me just say, Mike, I love the idea of co-curricular activities. It really is sort of like part of the sort of like the formation of young people. And I think the evidence shows that it kind of enriches the school experience for students if they can find elements within their sort of like their broad definition of education which they're experiencing, which really speak to them, which really really speak to their own sort of passions and interests. And by thinking something as co-curricular rather than something outside of the curriculum, we validate and we value what it is that where their particular passions lie.
Thanks for that, Anthony. And Nadia, I wonder if you'd like to reflect on some of the things that have just been said there, and also I'll throw a question at you as well, which is, year after year when you've been starting new school terms, has it been harder for teachers to get students to concentrate now because of the impact of mobile phones, of tablets, of the internet, of now AI on modern life, where you've got this huge virtual world, which is at least as much as the outside world as a part of students' lives?
Definitely, I do think that as students are very much affected by the internet, by the social media. So like during recess time, lots of us would pull out our phones and, scroll through social media. And I feel like back when we had the rule to give our phones to the teacher for the whole school period, and then we needed to take it back when we ended school. Yeah, now we do not have that rule, so it's definitely really different. There is less conversation going on between one another. But I feel like the effect wasn't too drastic because during the pandemic, we spent most of our time talking to each other through meetings like Google Meet or Zoom. And because of that, we are very much used to technology, and it makes us treasure more of the moments when we meet our friends offline. So I do think another aspect that we've talked about, like extracurriculars, that has definitely impacted a lot of aspects in our life. It makes us want to meet our friends more, when we make friends in the extracurriculars and we look forward to it at the end of the day. I feel like it plays such a big part in our lives, especially in exploring other parts outside of academics. So yeah, it's definitely great. I do realize though that extracurriculars nowadays, sometimes they are being graded, which makes it a little bit more serious, and it makes the students more focused towards the extracurricular more as a subject than exploring their own interests. On one hand, I think this is great because it pushes like the students to actually focus and put effort into their extracurriculars. But I feel like extracurriculars are more of a space for us to freely explore and all of that. So yeah, I'm really curious to hear about the opinions here from the other speakers. What do they think about extracurriculars? Like how should we be managing this?
Mike, I see your microphone's open. Go for it. Nadia's question.
Okay, I think Nadia's point about extracurricular or co-curriculars being very focused and competition driven, it's a valid one because we've seen that in Singapore's context as well. So we have removed some of the competition away from some of the sports and extracurricular activities so that it can be accessible for more. While those who want to focus on the competitive element of that particular sport or the co-curricular activity, they can still pursue it, right? So you can pursue for excellence, or you can pursue that co-curricular activity for opening up opportunities for you to just try out, right? You don't know whether you like it or not. You need to try it out. And if it's graded and all that, probably it's difficult to try out. Right. So I think it's important to have different options available so that more opportunities are open for students to see. Right. In terms of technology, let me just come back. We still have many schools in Singapore still ban handphones from classroom. Right. But there's still digital learning devices in the classroom, but like tablets or laptops, but not handphones. Right. So what we have found is the tablets if for learning purposes, it's a lot more effective than the use of the handphone. And like Nadia said, once you have the handphone with the texting and social media and everything that comes into play, you actually move away from that real life conversations that you may be having with your friends. So there are many schools in Singapore where even students themselves have decided that even during their class breaks, during recess, they'll put the phones away so that they can have conversations with their friends rather than being on the phone, right? So I think we are still exploring on how to balance the use of mobile devices, especially handphones in schools. But I sort of landed at this point where we try not to bring that handphone into the classroom because we don't need it for learning purposes. There are digital devices available for students in Singapore schools that can be used to integrate technology while they are learning. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. And Nadia, to turn the teacher-student relationship on its head there, if you had to give Mike marks out of 10 for his answer, what would you give him for his answer to your question there?
I think
Okay.
definitely 10 out of 10. Like, I agree with the points you mentioned, you know, how relationships, bonds are really important between students and teachers and students, because it's what keeps the school together. Like, it's what keeps the community going on. Because having bonds with your peers allow you to communicate with them, to talk with them. If you have any difficulties, like if we're facing a really difficult question, or if there's anything we don't understand, we can just come up to them and ask them, you know. And meeting my friends is like the highlight of the day. So that's definitely an important part. And having bonds with your teacher is also very essential, because teachers are the ones who will be teaching you the material and the way they talk to you. Like nowadays, I feel like teachers are adjusting a lot to how the current teenagers talk. And I think it's really helpful, like, because we can understand what they're actually saying, because there are sometimes really complex terms that need more elaboration. And thanks to how the teachers have been adjusting to whatever's that's going on nowadays and how we talk in our daily lives, it makes the flow way more easy to comprehend. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Nadia, and thanks for all the comments as well. Alison Emelman writes, our learners lock their phones up at the start of the day and only get them back at the end of the day at school. I'm not sure what country you're from, Alison, but I know that's the case in other places as well. Geeta Rani Sarman from India asks, how can AI help future education in remote rural areas? Ikioluwa Aid Oe from Nigeria asks, can AI really enhance teaching and learning? I know we've touched on a lot of this already, but Anthony Mann, on that subject, can AI really enhance teaching and learning? There is so much hype about AI, but should teachers be using AI in classrooms, or should there be limits to it?
Yeah, well, let me reflect on that and bring in the earlier question which you mentioned, which was about rural areas, and let me talk about it in terms of kind of career development, career guidance, because what we see since the pandemic, a huge growth in the use of digital technologies in guidance, including AI. And you can make a case that, you know, these will allow guidance to be more effective in that, the right student can access the right intervention at the right time in their journey. They're less dependent upon, kind of physical resources within a school. And this might be a self-assessment, career exploration questionnaire. It might be a conversation with somebody in a particular job. It might even be virtual work placement. It could be a range of things. So you can see the way that it could be more effective. It could be more efficient, it could save money for people. So you could do more for less. So you can free up money, free up time of guidance counselors to spend more time one-to-one, and certainly more equitable. And, this is, particularly where rural areas come in, where it's difficult to bus students, maybe sometimes 3-4 hours to go to a job fair. It's difficult, maybe the local economy is not particularly varied. It might be all farming in a particular area, and so you can see the way that it would really make a big difference. And AI, we see particularly AI being used in chatbots. where students will engage with, with chatbots and have conversations, and you have kind of like an adaptive learning from the technology. So it looks at the answers to your questions and it adapts the questions which you might get then. And, so we do find that, some of the advantages are that, you can, easily translate to different languages. You can do voice to text. Some students with disabilities can make greater use of these resources. The thing is, though, that nothing's been evaluated, and so it's kind of really interesting question about the extent to which, Nadia, if you were to, meet somebody in person, and they were kind of provide you some insight into the kind of the role which they did, is that the same as you meet them online? So does does the same mental process happens? Because we know in real life that there's a lot of studies about social connection, social capital theory, where we see somebody, we form a judgment very, very quickly about whether we can trust somebody and believe somebody. Do we see the same processes applying through digital interventions? We certainly know that there's a lot of interest amongst young people. We ask in PISA, what are the sorts of things which you do to be able to, sort of like develop your, your career thinking? Top two answers are always, I use the internet to, research careers. I use the internet to research, post-secondary programs. Far more than they actually spend time in a job fair or doing visits to workplaces. So, we do need, the research needs to catch up with the practice. And so we can compare the face-to-face and the digital, but also in digital forms, we see multiple, it's a marketplace, huge numbers of different opportunities, options are arising, and we kind of need, so I suppose, governments really to, help the education community to understand what's like to be more effective and for who.
Thank you so much for that, Anthony. I can see now, I just glanced at the clock and I realize we're running out of time. And to end, I'm going to do a quick fire round with you here. A last question. It's a bit of a loaded question as well. It's from Hannah Bailey. She asks if it's possible to achieve a welcoming, nurturing and inspiring start back to school within the confines of our education-focused, measurement-obsessed ecosystem. Mike, if I can turn to you first, and if you can keep your answer relatively concise, is it possible to achieve welcoming, nurturing and inspiring starts back to school, given the world we live in?
I think that's fundamental, right? If you don't have that going first, we're going to not succeed in whatever else we want to achieve. So we have focused and we have narrowed down that education is essentially a human endeavor, right? And human relationships and human thinking and psychological well-being is fundamental for success to happen, right? We are spending quite a bit of energies and time. We've reframed our curriculum. We have cut down content teaching. If you look at Singapore's syllabus and curriculum, it's very content light, right? So it's focused on skills and the interactions that happens in the classroom. That's more fundamental, right? Because we realized even during the pandemic, when we went on a home-based learning, online learning for 1 month, it didn't quite seem like education was happening. There was some teaching and learning, but not overall education, right? The interactions were missing, the care, concern, the elements that comes into being in a classroom face-to-face was not there. So we actually closed school and brought back the students with all the safety measures in place back into school. So we didn't actually lose curriculum time or whatever it is during the pandemic. They were all in school, right? So I think that was an important point that we learned, that technology helps, but technology is not everything. It doesn't solve all our problems. It cannot be a great teacher. It cannot replace a good teacher. It probably can enhance a good teacher's teaching and learning capacity.
Thanks for that, Mike.
Yeah.
And Nadia, for you, is it possible to achieve a welcoming, nurturing start back to schools, given the exam-focused, measurement-obsessed society we live in?
Definitely. I think it's very possible to achieve that. Although when students often start school, they would start thinking of all the exams and all the assignments they have to do. But eventually, we'll all realize that in order to achieve all of these, we cannot only count on ourselves, and that our community is very important. I do see that the school is putting a lot of effort in trying to, make the environment very welcoming, very safe, very friendly. And I like how it's going because it allows the students to freely explore, freely voice their ideas. And by doing so, they are encouraged to think more critically. And I feel like this impacts a lot on not only like improvement of themselves, because critical thinking helps them to process information definitely better, but it also helps to enhance like the classroom because it will also like make their friends think the same way, and then they'll start realizing several things, several points that they have previously missed. And I think it's just a really important aspect and definitely possible to be achieved with the teachers and friends.
Thank you so much for that, Nadia. And Anthony Mann, the OECD's very own, the last word to you, sir.
Well, certainly it is possible, but it requires quite a smart balance in between a focus on ensuring that those fundamental building blocks of kind of knowledge or understanding are there, but also sort of creating that environment which really welcomes and values all students. And I'll leave you with one final statistic from PISA. It's a bit depressing. On average across the OECD countries, 20% of students say that school is a waste of time. And that sort of like varies, but we can see the way we might be pushing up sort of like academic achievement for some students. But if it's at the expense of a group of students who really feel sort of like alienated from the process and don't see the point, well, then perhaps we need to think again.
Thank you so much for that, Anthony. Always end on a positive. The OEC's Anthony Mann there, thank you so much. Also, Mike Thiruman from Singapore and Nadia Christy Lee in Jakarta. That's it for us. Thanks to the production team. Thanks to those working behind the scenes. And of course, thank you to all of you who were watching and sending in your questions and comments. We will be back for more webinars soon. See you soon. All the best.